Welcome to Blue Collar Mystics, the under-the-hood approach to the depths of human consciousness. So many mysteries, so little time, so many big words. That's why we aim to take the mystical and make it practical, usable in your everyday life. And you know, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your story. What happened when you started asking yourself the real questions? Like, who am I? What is this? Is it a hologram? Is this some kind of weird cosmic joke? Hey, these are the questions that we are trying to get to the bottom of as we explore the final rabbit hole together here as Blue Collar Mystics. Right. What's up, everybody? See everybody here in the chat. Welcome. We got some woots. We got some people who are just in time. Welcome, Honey, Caroline, Nick, everybody here in the chat. Austin, I promise we'll get to what your comments. I see all of them here, so no worries. I want to say welcome. I am your host, Blue Collar Mystics. You can call me the Wolfman.
Here in the chat, Austin.
Somebody is echoing. If you'll check your audio settings here. I think it's you, James. Just make sure you've got that. There's a little box in your settings that is an echo preventer kind of thing. Anyway, we are streaming live here on YouTube. We are live on Rockfin as well. So hop on over, come and hang out with us. We're also live in our Facebook group, and it gives me a lot of joy and pleasure. This stream is going to be hot. As you can see, I already brought my towel. We've got Mr. Mark Stavish, who's done so much work, and I'm really excited to speak with him. I read your book a couple of years ago. Bill just read it. We talked a little bit before the interview about how to differentiate this a little bit, and we're definitely open, especially having some people in the chat. They may have some clarifying questions that they want to offer up. And just before we get into that, just want to say thanks to everybody and remind you all that we are streaming now, but all of this content will be sent out to Rumble and I don't know, all these other platforms. Thanks to our friends at Content Safe. They keep our content published on all the platforms, so I don't have to sit here and upload all day. So I just want to shout out to them. And before we get into it, Mark, your reputation truly precedes you. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being a part of this stream. If you don't mind, for anybody who's not familiar with your work, will you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Oh, well, I'm best known for being the founder and the director of studies for the Institute for Hermetic Studies. I'm the author of about 28 or 30 books on esotericism, and I've been doing this for quite a long time. In fact, I was very fortunate enough to have a family that was involved in it, my great uncle in particular, and his father, going back to Central Europe. So I'm quite familiar with the variety of esoteric practices from a young age, and that's the short story.
Cool. Yeah, I've got your links in the description below, so everybody go check out the Institute for Hermetic Studies. There's a vast wealth of information there, and we are going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. Austin said earlier, even before we got started, how deep in magic are we talking here? Spells, intentions, spirits, mantras, all the above. We're talking pretty deep. You've been at this for quite some time, and it's something that we are all fascinated by and interested in. So we're going to be going very, very deep. Be sure to ask lots of questions there in the chat, guys. And he's talking about Anunnaki, reptilians, what kind of entities watch over the humans, all of the above, etc. It's gonna get wild. Great question, and we're definitely going to be covering that. The primary book that we're going to be talking about is Egregores, which is Mark's book about the occult entities that watch over human destiny. And he's done a lot of interviews on this. If you want to go and just search through, go and check out the Institute for Hermetic Studies. There's tons and tons of content on this. We're going to do a little bit different, but I'd love to start with the basics and talk about some distinguishing factors and characteristics here. As when it comes to egregores, I guess gregors would be within, egregores would be something that is somehow removed from this world that we kind of inhabit, and what influence they have. So maybe we can start with just a basic definition, just for anyone, for remedial sake, to get started, if that's okay.
Well, and of course, this is in terms of pronunciation, it's like tomato, tomato. It's a Greek term, and it's egregore is closer to the pronunciation. But of course, we say egregores for simplicity. And an egregore is a collective thought form. And within that framework, what makes it distinct from, say, other thought forms is that it is always collective. And that needs to be understood. So all egregores are collective thought forms, but all thought forms are egregores. And a perfect example is this. You want to achieve a certain goal, and it could be anything. You want to get a new car. You want to get a new job. You want to get a new house, or possibly you just want to get a better grade on a test or something. So you focus your mind on this goal, and you, of course, work to do the things necessary for it, but you're focused on this outcome. That is more or less just focused or concerned with you. I mean, yes, with a job or something, there can be other people, and often we do engage with other people in the fulfillment of these goals, but we would call that a thought form. Whereas your involvement in a group activity, whether it be a football team, a political movement, a religious movement, an esoteric movement, and to some greater or lesser degree, even this podcast, okay, we would then say, well, that's an egregore, depending on how strong it is. There can be very weak egregores, but anything that has a collective identity, a collective attitude or perception, that would form an egregore. And you see these with families as well. Families have very distinct approaches to things, particularly if you have dealt with what we could call traditional families, whether they be higher on the socioeconomic scale or lower on the socioeconomic scale, doesn't matter. There's a certain perception of what it means to be a member of that family, what values are had, and how things are to be done. So there's many types of egregores. We're awash in them, if you will.
Yeah, would you maybe define it as like the energetic sort of, now I'm at a loss, but like the energetic sort of other side of how a group works? We talked a little bit about Gustave Le Bon's book, The Crowd, and how people act in just irrational ways and ways that are out of their character when they get together in a group, and some sort of energy forms, maybe the energetic counterpart to the physical clique that we see, the groups that we see, whether it be a gym, this podcast, I could make a ton, like political party, sports team, etc.
Well, when we use the term energy there, we have to remember that there's a tendency to use that in a value neutral kind of way. Because we use energy without really thinking of it. We don't think about it. Now, of course, with energy prices going up, and especially in Europe, there's considerable thought about what is energy. What does it mean? You see that constant discussion of energy, even in environmental circles. They say, listen, you can do things with oil that you can't do with solar, wind, or other renewables. Okay, it's simply that. It's that simple. There is a unique aspect to oil that is not transferable to those other energy sources. So energy has a distinct, we'll call it intelligence, a unique quality to it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's what would make a refined petroleum product different from another refined petroleum product, but they're all petroleum products. That's what makes a particular type of energy different from other forms of energy. So we have to understand, in the metaphysical sense, energy also has that notion of intelligence. Now, not necessarily sentience, but unique qualities.
Fascinating. I love that. That's really, really good. Yeah. And I just realized that I wanted to make sure that I'm welcoming Bill here. He really kind of spurned this whole idea because he just finished your book. And of course, my good friend and partner, Mr. James Thomas, aka Admiral Hits, the Gongmeister himself. I want to welcome you guys as well. And I know Bill will have some really interesting questions. He's written some questions down, and he has a podcast called 13 Questions. You guys should definitely check that out. It's a lot of fun. One of the things that they do at the beginning of each one of their shows is they have a moment and they talk about something that they're grateful for. They give a little bit of a gratitude, which is something that I'm very passionate about too. That's something that I do every single day, every single morning. And they even have a song that goes that they play with it. Yeah, for whatever reason, I've got the Misfits stuck in my head right now. Gratitude, but that is not the song that they use. But he every time he's been on, we've started out with just something that we're grateful for. Yeah, I'll ask you actually, Bill, if you wouldn't mind,
Sure.
to go ahead and start that.
Yeah. This is something that my co-host Adam and I do at the intros before we get into the interview sections of our podcasts. And the idea behind it is just to kind of help facilitate the heart-brain coherence. And this is important because what I've come to learn through talking to tons of interesting people on my podcast is that the universe seems to have this holographic nature to it. It's kind of like a mirror universe. So when we generate this feeling of gratitude, the universe kind of reflects it back to us. So in thinking about things that make us happy, that we're grateful for, right? We're activating. Fun fact: there's actually some neurons in our heart, our physical heart, about 30 to 40,000 like brain neurons that we would find like in your brain cells, right? So generating this feeling, like I said, allows the universe to be reflected back to us. So yeah, just thinking about things that you're grateful for. And the one I wanted to use for this live stream is actually my brother, because he's the one that gave me your book, Mark, as a wedding gift, actually. So yeah, thanks, Bob, for I guess in a weird synchronistic way making this happen, because Owen, like I said, I got finished reading it and it made me think of Vadim Zealand's Owen, what is that? Reality transurfing, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I immediately told Owen about it, and then he wanted to do the whole live stream thing, which I thought was great. So yeah, that's just that's my gratitude I wanted to share. And I just, if anybody else wants to do the same, like we're sitting around table at Thanksgiving, that'd be cool. And maybe listeners can think of something too. So
yeah, definitely tell us what you're grateful for in the chat if you're hanging out with us live. I have a couple of buddies that I just want to shout them out, a couple of friends of mine that I'm really grateful for, that I have a group chat with, and we connect pretty much every day. And just want to shout out my friends Will and Tommy for being supportive and riffing it up, because we do a lot of jokes and silly memes and stuff like that, just to kind of keep everybody cheered up and grateful, and it makes getting through the day a lot more fun. So I just want to shout those guys out today. Really appreciate those guys. Sometimes they'll hop in our chats and try to break us as we're on the stream, just throwing in hilarious quips and one-liners and stuff like that. So they may, those one or two of those guys may or may not show up. If you see anything distracting, that might be what it is. They're not trolls, I promise. They're just goofing, and they're just awesome guys. So I'm really grateful for those two gentlemen in my life. And also I'll shout out to our friend Laura here on Rockfin. She came out and saw me do some comedy in Atlanta. Wasn't my best night, but it happens. I really appreciate her coming out and hanging out with me. My little bro and Tommy also came out. So just really appreciate that. Just really appreciate all the support, all you guys being here. It means so much to have people in the chat. It really, really means a lot. I hope you're connecting. I hope you're following those links, and I hope you'll share with us. Please do. We love to hear it. And just want to say thanks again to everybody who's here hanging out on the stream. Mr. Hits.
Just thinking about, I'm grateful for my network. I just finished a 4-month tour on a shoestring budget, and all the people in my life are downright amazing. And you know, and I'm thankful for all the projects that I'm working on, and the resistances that come with that. The challenges that are forcing me to grow and work through, and yeah, I'm grateful for Mark and Bill for joining us today and giving us some neat information to chew on. So yeah, did I lose you guys?
Cool. Well, that's great. And Mark, would you care to share? It's not required, but you're welcome to if you'd like.
Well, it's always nice to have an audience and to speak with people about this topic. It's a great deal of fun. So, uh, gratitude just comes with the territory of being an author, where someone says they read your book, and they didn't buy it used.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend everybody to go out there, buy it new. Where's the best place for everybody to buy it?
It doesn't matter. Just Amazon or your local bookstore, or go directly to the publisher. Inner Traditions.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, thank you guys all so very much for being here and sharing this moment with us. I love doing these live streams. It's really, really cool. It's great to connect in real time with everybody. So yeah, once again, thanks for being here. And yeah, be sure to check everything out. Mr. Hitz, you just getting off that 4-month tour. I'm grateful that you made it all the way out to Burning Man and all these festivals and doing all these things, having the opportunity to put people in your sonic portal psychedelic spaceship and making it all the way back to the East Coast in Southern Appalachia. Welcome home, man.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here. I've got a newfound direction, and really ready to do some deep work this winter just to close out some of these other projects and start the new ones up. And super excited to get back into this too. We've done you've done a few that were recorded and put out that I haven't been present for, so it's just nice to get back. Forgot my headphones today.
You sound good. Yeah. And yeah, I'm happy to have you back, man. It's awesome to have such a good round number here too. We're filling out the screen. We got 4 people on. I think that's really cool. I like that a lot. Well, cool. Well, there's really truly a lot. So be sure to, like I said, there in the chat, whatever questions you guys have, just shoot them in there. We're just going to be very casual. We're going to talk about some of this stuff. And this is one of the ideas that truly changed my life. When I found out about the idea of an egregore, I started seeing this everywhere, right? Everywhere. And what I realized was a lot of the things that I considered habits or shortcomings in my own life were not necessarily, well, I mean, obviously that's me internalizing things, but seeing it as an external energy or an external force or something like that. For instance, when I learned about this concept, I was able to quit smoking cigarettes, which is something that I never thought I would ever be able to do. But this idea specifically, and even at that point in time, like my roommate kind of threw it in my face because I was like talking about this concept and he's like, well, cigarettes are cigarettes are an egregore. And I'm like, yeah, thanks for that, bro. Like, so is ordering McDonald's at midnight. You know what I mean, buddy? But it is what it is. But honestly, taking this idea and being able to kind of see it and externalize it, it's given me a lot more, I would say, individual power because so many of the things that I thought were maybe my own shortcomings were energies, which, we can get into kind of how this whole thing works, were energies, ideas, etc., that I kind of got sort of, I want to say maybe seduced a little bit by, right? Like these ideas in society, a lot of the social pressure, different ideas that we're exposed to, whether it be like the woke ideas or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like a lot of these groups and people influence the meme that is culture and society, and it's, I think once we can externalize it and sort of add a little bit of a buffer between who we are and know who we are individually, as opposed to just how we identify with these externalized ideas and groups, etc., then there's a separation, I think, that can occur. And I think it can be very, very good for our individual development.
I think that the statement, how this book changed your life, is something that I hear quite often. And it wasn't what I expected to hear from people, and was really pleased when I did, because it was very simple. Once they had a word, a term for it, they could say, yeah, okay, that's it. That's what was going on. I get it. And they were wrapping their head around the idea, but they couldn't give it a name or a word. And language is incredibly important. And having the name of a thing, having a label for something, helps us to conceptualize it. It helps us to make it concrete. Now, of course, the reverse of that is true as well. And that's why when one enters into esoteric practices, particularly meditation, one begins to stop labeling, because our tendency is to look, identify, label, and move on. And that keeps us from having an experience of a thing, because we think we already know it because we've given a name to it. But those names are very helpful to us in day-to-day life. They just aren't always very helpful to us in other things. So we have to keep that in mind. It's good that when I want a cup of coffee, I get to say, I want a cup of coffee, not a thingamajiggy filled with that brown stuff. Okay, that we know what we're talking about. So the ability to give a name to something also connects into the esoteric practices around, someone had asked her about mantras or recitations, but particularly you see that within the Egyptian mythology. Isis is able to get the secret name of Ra. And by getting the secret name, she's able to get the magical power. And it's important to know that in ancient Egypt, there was no word for religion. It was just a kind of magical power that existed. And you even see that across most of the Middle East, that the notion of the holy is that of an individual accumulation of power. And this is not limited to there, of course, but we see it then later get replaced by the notion of the collective. And then the collective becomes the notion of the church. And then, of course, the church with a monotheism. So we see that kind of notion of the egregore functioning very well there on a societal and historical level. So when we can name something, we can wrap our head around it. It's also what you see in any of the classical texts on exorcism. Now, what exorcism means, we generally think of it as casting out, but what it means is to conjure and bind, to conjure and compel by oath, again by word. So the entity or being is conjured or called forth, which involves language. Its name is extracted from it, and then it's bound by oath. Language is exchanged in order to say, this is what you're going to do. Okay. So whenever we can name something, we can talk about it. We can wrap our heads around it. We can begin to, I don't want to say control it, but that's a good word. We can control it rather than having it control us.
Yeah, even just managing our interactions with it, right? Like to get to that place for me and seeing like the externalized aspect of it, it just made it so much more easy for me to like navigate and sort of put a barrier between myself and whatever those things were. And I think great example might be something like a sports game. You go to a sports game, you feel the energy there, and all the people, and there's like an egregore and a culture and all that on one side, and then there's another on the other side. And one of the things that really made me really opened me up to being able to shift my awareness and actually have some positive changes in my life was understanding that the less attention that I gave those things, the less that I was being affected by them. So sort of the idea is that I would say positive or negative energy continues to propel whatever that idea is, whatever we're feeding, whether it's good or bad, so to speak, right? Like, to speak in very loose terms. And so to just withdraw that attention from it, it was doubly helpful for me, whereas I was able to change some habits by identifying the thing as you're talking about and seeing it as what it is outside of myself, and also being able to understand, my relationship to it, and begin to control my attention and say, all right, well, you know what? I'm going to shift my attention to what I do want as opposed to what I don't want. And that was really incredibly beneficial for me. This is
the point, is that what you direct your attention towards, the energy follows. So in yoga, they would say the prana. The first unit of life, the prana, of energy of life, follows. And that's important. It's the energy of life. So it makes it more alive. If you're maybe doing qigong or something, you say the qi follows it. But whatever it is, where the attention goes, the energy flows. And this is really very important, because there are many things out there that are attempting to grab your attention. They're trying to grab your energy across the day. And many of them are not necessarily in your best interest. And many of them are neutral. And many of them are good for you. The question is, how do you find out unless you get some space? And that space is, again, a form of deconditioning. And when we talk about meditation, we're really talking about learning to give ourselves mental space. But with that, also emotional and physical space too. They're not separate entities. And what do we mean by space? It's really the space between our thoughts, which really, what we're saying with space between our thoughts is this: the space between stimulus response. I'm driving down the street. Now, there's a picture in my mind as I say this to you. Okay? I have passed McDonald's. Okay? But I see the Burger King high and to the right, and it is a wonderful warm day, and that smell of French fries and hamburgers on the grill is being piped out into the air. Now, I've just built an image for you. How many of you could smell that hamburger? Now, there's a stimulus response there, right? And all advertising is based around it. All promotion is based around it. But also, so is all, and we'll say this in a negative way, propaganda. And what you end up with is simplistic ideas for simple people. Because for things to work, there has to be a little bit of truth to it. Stereotypes exist because they're real. Otherwise, sitcoms wouldn't exist as an entertainment form. They're the poor man's archetype, to put it another way. Advertising is filled with the typical consumer, the typical audience, the typical user. You get it? Those are archetypes, stereotypes of who their audience is for, whether it's a Jeep, a truck, a Rolls Royce, a Jaguar, a new TV, or advertising on the Super Bowl. So we need to keep that in mind. So then within that framework, ideas are generated that the belief is will have a positive stimulus response for the desired outcome. And this is where we talked about in the book earlier about There's really no good or evil. There's just ideas and their consequences. Here's an example just for your audience. We've been hearing for the last few months that Putin is like Hitler. But when I ask people about that, no one really gives me a good reason why. They just give an example, well, aggression and all this. And okay. But the idea is, if I can link it, if I can personalize it, he is like this. Well, of course you're going to hate Hitler, because everybody who I disagree with is Hitler. We see that all over social media, right? That's the joke. It almost loses any meaning. But people fail to understand things about what that means in terms of consequences. Not only for the Russians, who lost, I think, 20 million people fighting Hitler, when you do that. But at the same time, what does it say in terms of the unspoken part of the communication? No, you don't negotiate with Hitler, so you don't negotiate with Putin. In the last few days, we've heard all this talk about the low threshold for nuclear exchange, or at least a nuclear weapon being used. Oh, but don't worry about it. Well, if Putin's like Hitler, most people probably reading or listening to this don't know that at the end of the war, Hitler ordered a scorched earth policy to destroy the entire Germany so that it could not be used by the Allies. Are we saying Putin is like that? Because if you're telling me, as someone who knows history, Putin is like Hitler, that's a question that comes to my mind. But it may not have come to yours, because you were given a simple notion of Hitler bad, Putin bad, they're the same. We're just going to hit the bad button. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that's how simple things are brought together to try and get a stimulus response off you. And how it's being done on a very, very important level. This is very important to all of us because it affects all of our lives and that of our children and grandchildren. So it's not to make a statement about the situation. It's to make a statement about how it's being presented to you.
Mm-hmm.
You understand that? Because even in doing this, there are people who automatically have the knee-jerk reaction that this is somehow a Putin apologetic. So all of those things are about stimulus, response, stimulus, response, response. So when you're in a situation with someone that is tense or very aggressive or very maybe overwhelming on an emotional level, what happens? Stimulus, response very fast. Okay. Now take this and put this on the group level. And that's what you have with an egregore. And it's very potent and powerful. Here's the thing, though. In the classical sense, the egregore is not, and this is really just a difficult word to use. It is not just a mental construct that sort of has a life of its own on some psychic dimension. It's not a psychic container like a cup is that serves a function but has no self-awareness. On the classical sense, an egregore is a conduit between those of us on terra firma through a host of astral or invisible energies to an intelligence or sentience of some power or being, which we could call a god, a demigod, maybe a saint, who knows if you're lucky, or others. We don't know. Now, some people who work with egregores a lot, they may know what they're dealing with. Others may not. They may think it's one thing and it's another. But at the end of the day, that egregore wants to be fed. And what it is fed with is your devotion. That's why you see in the classical text, particularly the Tibetan text or the Indian text, they talk about bhakti, devotion. That bhakti yoga is the quickest path to enlightenment in this degenerate age of the Kali Yuga. Okay. That's why you see within Catholicism that no matter how problematic it becomes for people, it has always held a profound devotional aspect in the form of veneration, particularly in the rosary. And that has been a core aspect of its attraction for people, regardless of whatever other political machinations it may be involved with. So that emotional energy is the food of the egregor. And where does that come from? It comes from the people within it, the individuals involved.
So in your book, you talk about how to break control of an egregore over your life, and so to tie that back into that, the evil doesn't need to control, like have absolute control over us. It just needs to distract us enough to keep us off balance. And so, silence, like what role does silence have in helping us to break the egregores hold over us? And then, like, are there any other like methods that you would recommend in ridding oneself of an egregore?
I think we have to understand what the first part means in terms of distraction. You're born, you live, you die. You have X amount of time on this earth. It's up to you what you're going to do with it. For a variety of reasons, many people waste their time. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, and of course, he gets lambasted. And I think the more he talks about it, the more I like to promote it, because the notion is you have X amount of time on this planet. You don't know how much time that is. Use it wisely. So when you are distracted from using your time wisely, you are distracted from being, and I'll be moralistic here, a force for good. Simply put, you're not doing anything constructive. So if you're not doing anything constructive, that means at least you're not doing anything that gets in the way of my plans, whatever those plans happen to be. So, perfect example which I give is, decriminalization of drugs. It's wonderful. Let everyone medicate themselves. You just medicate yourself into ineffectiveness. You're not an effective force. It's that simple. How much time do you spend on video games? That's another drug. You're not an effective force. How much time do you spend on YouTube looking up videos about secret societies ruling the world? You're not an effective force. The only way you become an effective force is when you undertake a spiritual path of self-awakening, which requires of that path that you come to understand the nature of your own mind. Then you become an effective force. And that's when the forces of Mara, which is within your own mind as well as outside of it, because at that point there's not much of a difference, that's when they take notice of you. And we see that in the life of the Buddha. We see that exemplified in the life of Christ. We see that exemplified in all these different examples. But because they were effective forces, they could make a change or a difference.
Well, it fits right into the idea of the internal guardian, and not allowing the outside stimuli to control your internal thought. I'm a big fan of focus. Like, literally, video games was my first addiction. So you just hit a button there. I quit playing video games and I made a feature film with the time that I used to play video games with. And it's what you give your focus to that creates this environment. And your imagination and your awareness are your biggest assets outside of that focus. Your magic is your imagination. Your emotion is the power behind it, and your focus is where that happens. And if you have no focus, you really can't get anything done. And I've been suffering from focus all this week because I've been on the road for 4 months, getting back into, and I can totally feel now, being a week home, I'm starting to get that focus back and starting to find that power again. This is really powerful stuff. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Well, you did a good summary there. I mean, that's it. I mean, we have the power of imagination. We can conceive of things. We can draw upon memory and imagination. We can and recombine those ideas in memory, and have an idea as to what we would like to do with our time, with our life. However, unless we have a strong emotional drive to achieve that, it's not going to happen. And that drive has to be sustained. It has to be narrowed, which means to the exclusion of all else. And it may not have to be narrowed forever, but it may have to be narrowed for 15 minutes a day, or 30 minutes a day, and then it's narrowed onto something else, and then it's narrowed onto something else. And the best way to do that is, turn your phone off. And that's the first thing. And, watch where you go, watch what you eat. I remember taking my one son to the orthodontist, and it was early in the morning, and he said, can we get something to eat? And I said, before dropping off at school, I said, where do you want to go? And he goes, well, there's McDonald's, let's go there. I said, what do you want? He goes, well, get the pancakes. Okay, we'll get pancakes. It's not the worst thing on the menu, pancakes and eggs from there. And even at that hour of the morning, there's 3 or 4 large screen televisions with CNN going. Even in the orthodontist's office, there's a large television on the back of the room with some talk show on. It's that constant sensory bombardment that is pulling your awareness out, because that's what the senses are designed to do. That's why they face forward mostly, to design to put our attention outward into the world.
And that goes along the same lines of imagination too. It's like not only are you losing your focus, but through that stimuli directs your imagination for good or bad as well.
Yes, because it has an immediate the stimulus response time is very quick, so it has a strong effect on the imagination and the emotions. And in fact, a good thing to do is take a look at a movie or a television show from around 1970, 72, 74, 75, and notice and count how long it is between scene switches, and then watch a movie or television show now and count. And usually the amount of time between camera changes is about 2 to 3 seconds now, because it's boom, 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 boom. Now, this is intentional. It's a hypnotic device. It keeps you focused. That is, focused on whatever it happens to be. But it has a long-term degradation of your mental capacity. And I mean, that's why you see there's some fairly good documentaries out there where a lot of the folks who work in high tech won't let their children near high tech because of its degrading capacity. And we see that across the board. I see that with a lot of folks. So the more you can do to isolate yourself from external stimuli for a period of time each day on a regular basis, and just deal with your own internal thoughts and allow them to rise up and go down, and rise up and go down, and laugh at them or be horrified by them and laugh at them again, and then finally let it settle in. And then, of course, then you can move into other practices, particularly dream practices and those things. And maybe some visionary work. But that's where it all starts in the beginning, is knowing the nature of your own mind. Because if you don't, and you do those other practices, you think everything's outside. You think every weird inner thought you have is some ancient being trying to contact you or talk to you. It's not. It's your own mind. Now, it's not to say those things don't exist. I've just told you they do. But trust me, they're not really interested in you. And those that are, you don't want to be interested in them. So your personal daily mental discipline. When I say spiritual, that's what I mean. Your own psychological discipline, the discipline that allows you to have knowledge of your own psyche, your own being. Yeah. Because that's what egregores are built around. And then you get to decide which ones you want to be in. You say, hey, you know what? I tell my kid, you're in college, enjoy it. Go enjoy the college experience. for all it's worth, you know. But then you see people, they get to work and they identify very strongly with the corporate environment, whatever that happens to be. Or they identify with other things. Remember, anything where you say I am and then you fill in the blank, you know, that's where you get in trouble. Because all hypnosis and all magical action is an act of identification.
Mm.
You need to understand that. That needs to be clearly understood. So when you identify with a group, that's okay. But if you identify with that group too strongly, then what happens when that group isn't there or the ideals fail? I mean, when idealism fails, I mean that's when things go south really quick. We see that a lot.
I mean, even like empty nesters, right? As you get the family is an Egregore, and then eventually it starts to dissipate as it ages, and then you have parents that don't know what to do with themselves. And you know as that unit breaks up and it just starts to dissipate, they start to lose their identity.
Yes, and that's true. You see that a great deal. And there's all different types of ways the family dynamic, which is an egregore, manifests, because it's a collective relationship of forces and entities and consciousness interacting with one another that has both a past, a present, and some kind of future. The idea is how much of that past moves forward into the present and constrains us. You know, and that opens it up to the question about the role and influence of ancestors on us. And you know, that can be really very tricky, because you see a lot of people now are getting hung up on what's called ancestor practices. And you know, that's one thing, but you know, if you're just going to deal with that and that's what you're going to identify with, that's going to be very limiting. It's going to be very, very limiting in terms of your potential, what you can express. It is a very interesting and good beginning, but it is a terrible end. And I say that coming from, you know, a family tradition in German magic and medieval magic, straight out of Agrippa, and astrology, and alchemy. It's great that it is a good beginning, but it is not a good definition of who you are. It can be part of your path, but it's something you have to build upon. But also, what are these forces from the past? You know, well, we carry all of them genetically within us. We are the sum of our ancestors. And genetics is really a form of memory. So when we talk about karma, we're talking really about cause and effect. People over-exaggerate what karma is. It's cause and effect. It's if-then. Well, we have a lot of if-then situations where the then switches are getting clicked on. Mm-hmm. So within us, within our body structure, we have the summation of the karma of our ancestors. You know, now, what about the spiritual potential, the spiritual aspects? Well, you know, if you believe in survival after death, then maybe you know, those spiritual, our ancestors have certain actions which they want to continue to move forward. You know, we talked about before the show about the tulpa and the tulku. You know, what is this tulku? But is a magical generation. It's really a kind of sexual yoga, and it's at its core designed to genetically create and generate the ideal incarnation of a particular enlightened being or quality, archetype even. So you know, that can happen on a lesser level. So many people will be carrying along this kind of family karma. So it's good that we learn to deal with our ancestral traits, if you want to call them that, for good or ill. And a good or ill is, again, relative. It's relative to your condition or situation. It's not always the same. And move forward from there.
Yeah. I really like this idea of identity, and particularly kind of seeing the two sides of that, because we're talking about groups, we're talking about belonging. These are important to us as humans. We need to be part of something larger than ourselves, but we also need to understand who we are as individuals. I recently kind of got into some of Gurdjieff's work, and one of the things that he talks a little bit about is the difference between personality and essence. And I kind of see this sort of spectrum here where the personality part of us is kind of created, it's part of the groups that we are part of. It's who we think we are and who we want to be and how we want to be seen, and maybe a bit archetypal. But then the essence part, and as you're talking about meditation and taking space for ourselves and widening the area between stimulus and response, like that, he says, just like what you're talking about, that practice really comes from just experiencing ourselves and opening up space to really dive deeply into that. So I really love the illustration of both sides of this, the sort of archetype, the family, the identity that comes from that, but also the self-identity. And you said, what type of yoga did you say was best for the Kali Yuga time?
They say bhakti, devotional yoga, devotional practices.
Okay.
Devotion. Yeah, that's where you see where masks appear in various practices. We see them in very shamanic, but also classical initiations. The word personality comes from persona, which is the mask of the Greek theaters. And it's the mask you wear. It's a creation. It's something that you put on. And it's good to have a well-crafted and refined personality. Otherwise, you're just going to have a difficult time in this world. But you have to have a personality that also matches your environment. Sometimes you can have a personality that is somewhat bridges all sorts of environments. But that kind of thing is rare. And I'm thinking, for example, of Bobby Kennedy. He gave a speech to a group of rioting Southern blacks, and they were just about to riot. And they came in, and he spoke to them, as he was. And he talked right to them. Now, the gap couldn't be wider between who he was and where he came from, and who they were and where they came from. But his capacity as an orator, as a perceiver of his audience and understanding, was so clear that he simply spoke to them. Now, he didn't change his language in any way. It was still, this, I think he went to Harvard. I think it was the Harvard family, New England Kennedy guy, talking to rural blacks in the 60s who, many of them were probably borderline literate with education. But the ability to communicate language and presence and his whole persona or personality, they were able to see that package of who he was. And immediately the situation turned. And it turned for the better. And he was able to bring a stability to it that many other people simply wouldn't have been able to do. They wouldn't have been able to do it. So, and that doesn't take away from, the fact that he was also at times a pretty horrible human being, and him and his brothers, particularly with Marilyn Monroe. But that shows the complexity of the individual. Do you understand? We are very in that complexity. As we get so wound up in that complexity, we lose, quite literally, the notion of who we are without it. To simply relax and to be. So how many of you have often woken up in the morning and you didn't know where you were, even though you're in your own room or in your own bed? And for that moment, terror comes over you. How many of you woken up and maybe for a split second you didn't know who you were? And then it comes back. When you're falling asleep at night, you're not thinking about who you are. Well, that's gone. Yet we carry this ideas, which is the personalities that we then put on like a mask as we go out across the day. And then we take them off and put on a new one and take them off as we engage with people across situations across the day. And it's good that we can develop these complex personalities, because if we didn't, we'd be really difficult people. I mean, think of a person, and we've all known one. It's like, give a boy a hammer and everything's a nail. I mean, they've just got one way of dealing with everyone and everything, and you've got to adapt to them. Okay. Well, what an egregore does is an egregore gives us a personality. It gives us a thing to wear that we just have to accept and wear. And we say, I am this. And it gives you a whole backstory, a whole family backstory that you just don't have to worry about it anymore. And you've seen people get really caught up in religious movements like that. You've seen people really get caught up in politics like this, or any kind of social movement, because there the righteousness, the emotion is so strong. And that emotion is what keeps it going. And then what happens, when the problem is solved, they often don't know what to do. And that was a big problem with the anti-war movement. The anti-war movement was so anti that it didn't know what to do when some problems were solved, particularly in the post-Vietnam era, which goes back to language of how do we define things? Do we define them according to what they're not, or do we find them according to what they are? Because if you define things according to what they're not, then the mind has a bit of a difficulty with that. It has to kind of fill in the gap a little bit.
Yeah, you need a peace rally, not an anti-war movement, because you're just thinking about war.
Correct.
And that's what you're creating with your vibration. You're thinking about war, you're fighting war, you're trying to stop war, when you really need to focus on peace and the antithesis of war.
That's it. What is the operative word? What's the operative word in the sentence? And that's why, when I was back in the day, late at night, studying for exams, and television might be on, and these terrible, what were they, public service announcements would come on before the station went off the air at 3 a.m. or something. Yeah, these PSAs, I always wanted, because again, my great uncle was a hypnotist, and I knew these things. Why are they framing all these PSAs in a negative? Don't do this, rather than what to do.
Mind control.
Yeah.
Programming. They call it programming.
They call it programming for a reason. I think with the PSAs, they weren't just that. I don't think they were that bright. I really don't. I don't think there's that much thought into it.
Exactly. Well, they're the students working with public money and getting that nonprofit space donated at the worst time slot, right? So it isn't like they put the best minds and the best ideas at work. It's like, hey, you kids go do the project and we can put it on this time slot.
Well, it still sticks in my mind. One that I saw around 4 a.m. A public service announcement for NATO. I mean, it only came on once. I guess about like they even made this, but that's my point. Is that when you pay attention to the language, you begin to pay attention to how situations are being constructed for this stimulus response, which is what any type of magical action is about, which any type of hypnotic action is about.
Evocation, right? Is you got to evoke exactly what you want.
Something to keep in mind. There is a what is the name of it? General semantics. In general semantics, which can be very difficult, but it doesn't have to be. There's 3 basic things to keep in mind. And that is, you never solve a problem by going to extremes. Okay. Personalizing it, making it about the person, or emotionalizing it, making it about emotions. Now keep that in mind, because this is important. You solve problems by focusing on outcomes. So whenever you're in a situation where the group is emotionalizing or personalizing. Again, so-and-so is like Hitler. So-and-so is like blank. So-and-so is like Mussolini. So, simple. Okay. Where is your outrage? Are you not outraged by this? Okay. Do you understand how you see this in a lot of the social media? Okay. These are ways of keeping you from avoiding the problems, because if you want to solve a problem, you focus on the outcome. And you see that in spiritual practice, genuine spiritual practice, you're always going to be focusing on outcomes. Anything that's goal oriented, you're going to focus on what is the goal? What is the outcome I'm after? So that's also something to keep in mind with egregores. So when you're in a group, always ask, okay, what are they? Why am I here? What do I expect out of the relationship? And then, am I getting it? Like at some point, there has to be some sign that it's working, that I'm getting from this relationship what I was told I would get from it. Okay. Or at least how that would happen. So always keep that in mind. It's all about that's about outcomes, and that's a very important way to go about your dealings with people. Okay. Because then if you're getting your needs met.
That's why I prefer solution-based thinking over problem solving.
Yeah.
Problem solving is you're solving a problem. That's all you got is your problem.
Yeah, and I just use them interchangeably, because we identify, there's problems we have in life, and we have to identify them. We can't ignore them, but we have to focus on the solution. What's the outcome I'm after? Because that's going to give me actions to undertake. And you see, when people are in life, when they join a group, the egregore solves that for them. It gives you meaning. It solves your problems. It gives you the answers.
It also stimulates your imagination, which is a major component to that problem solving as well.
Well, correct, except in this case, it often hooks into your imagination and uses it against you.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not always that manipulative, but that's essentially how it works. It's
Well, it depends on how you're wired, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a story that I gave you about the Burger King hamburger. I'm not expecting you to drive out that right now and grab a burger, but when you're driving by, Burger King is putting that smoke into the air so that you get a whiff of that burger, and it stimulates your desire for the burger.
But I don't want their burger. I want my burger. I want to go to the store and get the good stuff.
Well, like all advertising dollars, half are wasted. We just don't know which half.
Yeah. They're definitely wasting it on me, man.
Yeah.
That's right. That's good.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about because we've had a lot of questions, what are the entities? What are these, these collections of what have you? Anunnaki, the reptilians, all of these kind of ideas and questions. I'd love to just touch on that, since a couple people have
I think if we look at the classical literature first, we see that there's a host of beings which we often refer to as angels and archangels and elementals. Within the Vajrayana systems and the Indian systems, we refer to classes of beings. It's a broader spectrum, but a class of being, and there's usually 6, but it can be 7, 8, or 9 that are listed. And what are these classes? They're their own sets and subsets of beings. I think we have to be very careful about over-identifying something we're not involved with, because there's really very little way to know it or to prove it. And even if you could prove it, what would you do with it? So if I have a class of beings that I have listed in a magical grimoire, magical text, and I undertake the works of ceremonial magic to call them up and have a relationship with them, I may find that my experiences are somewhat different from what other people think they are. Now, that's because I'm having a direct relationship with it. It's not a theoretical notion. And then when I try to convey what those relationships are, what these beings are like to someone else, they may not be able to grasp it. And we have to convey it in simpler terms. I think what we have to understand is this: we are not alone in the cosmos. And that there's a host of sentient beings, both in this world and in our bodies, and the little critters that live in your eyebrows, right? Bacteria that lives in your gut, and the dog that waits outside your door. Okay, all of these things, we have a host of sentient beings and hierarchies of relationships, and some of them are very helpful and beneficial to us. Some of them aren't, and some of them are indifferent. They don't care. But what matters most is how you understand your own mind, because any contact you have with these, we'll call them astral or spiritual beings, for lack of a better term, is going to happen first and foremost through your own mind anyhow. So are there wizard people? I don't know.
I don't either. I always thought of that as a metaphor,
And it probably is, and the problem with it is that even if there are, how do you prove it? And even if you could prove it, what would it matter? This is where we have to be careful about these investigations into some of these ideas, that they don't lead us down rabbit holes to which we get lost.
Because it doesn't really matter. What matters is your experience and what you focus on, and
Right.
how you apply your energy and resources in your human experience.
Yeah.
So it's just another lever to pull. You can go down all those holes, politics, lizard people, or whatever. There's plenty of stuff to do that, but they're all just obstacles and resistances for your human experience that you've incarnated for.
And the question always is, what kind of life are you building for yourself? Now, on the other hand, we have to keep in mind the warning from Alexandra David Neal from her book, in which she describes a discussion, which I think was probably not exactly a word-for-word description, just from having spoken with many lamas, but I think more of a conventional way of expressing it for the readers at that time, in which he says to her, or she says, well, are all these things just a creation of my own mind? And he says, yes and no. Well, what do you mean? Well, I have a thought. My thought has strength. It survives. Where does it go? Where does it take up residence? Just as we were talking earlier about the collective thoughts of a group. I don't have to be in a group for that collective thought to form. Time and space don't matter. So if my thought is weak, it dissipates. But if my thoughts are weak, maybe I'm more susceptible to the thoughts of others that are stronger. And then, of course, the notion is, as he said, just because you don't believe in the tiger doesn't mean the tiger doesn't believe in you. And you have to learn to protect yourself from the tigers created by others. So we live in this world, and we are here to make the most of our lives as best we possibly can. And yet at the same time, we cannot become caught up in our own little notion of my own spiritual path, as if it does not have a ripple effect on others, or that I'm too good for the big things in life, the big, or certain questions. Again, as I gave the example earlier, there's serious things going on in the world today, and I'm at a loss as to why so many within the esoteric community have not stepped up with any kind of concerted voice regarding
I have theories.
the utilization of their psychic qualities for enhancing the peace sphere around our globe. And I think this is a very important point. That we do not live outside this world; we live in it. And one of the first things you do in Tibetan Buddhism, one of the first things you learn is called a Vajrasattva practice. And within that practice is a generating goodwill. What they call bodhicitta, general goodwill towards yourself first and those close to you. But it moves out to everyone. And everyone means everyone into all these beings that I mentioned, all these dimensions of beings too, these qualities of beings. So I think that it's very important for the listeners to recognize the environment that we are in now, and that to generate actively a genuine sense of goodwill to help everyone. I'm sorry, James, I didn't mean to speak over.
No. I mean, you spoke a lot. I've had a lot of issues within the esoteric community and a lot of the people who are spiritual with these last 3 years. And I'm not trained. I had, for me personally, I had a string of experiences that woke me up. And then there's these people that have been studying for years that are all scared and wearing masks and preaching follow the government. Like, and where are they exactly? I've been asking the exact same question. Why do I feel alone, thinking all positive and believing the world is good and it'd be whatever we want it to be? And the people who are supposed to be leading us spiritually are just as lost as our politicians right now. And it goes back to, you have to be your own goddamn hero. Nobody's coming to save you, ever. No one knows what's going on in your mind. No one knows about your human experience and dealing with and transcending your traumas and hangups and blockages. And you have to be your hero. And a lot of people have outsourced they're willing, they think someone's coming to fix it. And it's, all this Marvel comic bullshit. And even these politicians, putting our hopes and people putting their hopes in billionaires and Donald Trump and things. It's like, no, you have to actively participate and work on the things that are making you tick and making you live through this world. And everybody's got their own little puzzle to figure out.
Well, and that's it. When you look at the group activities that you're in, you look at them in terms of, how are they impacting on me? How am I impacting on them? Can I impact them for the better? And how? What needs to be done? And is that worth my time? When I was on a library board, not a lot of this complex story, but board. At one point, I resigned because of, we'll call it financial mismanagement. Until the state police came knocking on my door for the interview regarding the missing money. I just said to the guy, "Well, it took you long enough." Now I could have stayed on and battled that, but the advice I got from professionals was, "Nope, this is how it's gonna go. So you resign now, you do it in writing, you make everyone know that it was done and very formal, so you distance yourself from that for when it craters." Okay. And stepped in, I did the best I could with it, and then left as soon as when I was told professionally, this is not something you want to be around when it goes south. I've seen that with esoteric groups, large ones. People don't really know despair until they've seen, or despair is maybe not the proper word. Disillusionment is the word. Until they've seen a group that they've been in for 10, 20, 30, 40 years or more suddenly just crater in on itself. Because it's built around these very, very high ideals. And these high ideals are almost impossible to attain. So it is a kind of outsourcing, a constant projection onto the leadership. That the leadership is going to have, how can this happen to our leadership? How can they be this human? Which leads to a kind of cynicism too. We've seen the reverse of that. Then there's a cynicism. Somewhere there are very good teachers out there. I've been fortunate enough to know them. They're very good people, and it's very important that you make an effort to find one or more good teachers who could help you learn what you need to do to work through your processes and learn and understand your path. Otherwise, it's very hard on your own. It's very hard, especially in the beginning, without someone holding your nose to it. But at some point, you have to stand on your own 2 feet, and you have to get up and you have to walk that, crawl that, do whatever you have to do. but you're the one who does the work on it. No one does it for you.
Yeah, you need mentors, not heroes.
Right. And the mentor is a, you know, in a sense is a very heroic figure because they've done these great things in the classical sense of the word hero, in the classical sense. But you know, you're right. What we've done is we've kind of turned them into these you know, comic book two-dimensional imitations, a very poor imitation of what a teacher should be. And that's because, you know, the Tibetans have a saying, lamas and incense should never be too close or too much. Meaning that you should never burn too much incense and be too close to it. And you should never really have too many lamas or be around them too much. You should be doing, you know, learn what you need to learn, have the relationship, know what the relationship is. But then the relationship is about getting work done, about your practice. It's not about your personal nonsense.
That's really good. There's definitely a lot of, it's a fine line, you know, because, and it's kind of ironic, right? Like that we need help to know ourselves. But maybe we could talk a little bit about that, just as far as maybe some practical tips, like how to find the right people and when to move on. You know, when I was younger and I was in therapy, traditional Western therapy, the therapist had no interest in ending our sessions. It wasn't until I got into esotericism and started working in hypnotherapy, where I worked with someone. We had like 6 or 7 sessions, can't remember what exactly, but she looked at me and I remember this so clearly. She was like, all right, we're done. She was like, you can come back and work on other stuff if you want to, but for what we started out to accomplish, we finished. And, you know, that's it. There's an end date. And, you know, it was me moving from that place to another place and having a little bit more self-awareness and healing. And you know, it was kind of, it shocked me because I expected her to continue to want to, you know, I don't want to say extort me, but to continue to see me as an ATM, more or less, right? Like, come back every week, you know, it's $70 an hour. So, you know, and of course we all have a vested interest in, you know, sustaining ourselves and making money. But it's just an interesting contrast there between those two things. I would love to hear your thoughts on that for people who are maybe seeking to grow or looking for people to help them open up their own awareness.
Well, it is really very difficult for a lot of reasons. And many of them are cultural, and many of them are false notions people have about teachers and false idealism. And the practices themselves, what they expect out of it. You have to, first of all, be honest with yourself and say, I come to the path because I am dissatisfied with my life. And I am dissatisfied with myself, my self-perception, my actions, my thoughts, my deeds, whatever. You have to be honest with yourself about that. Once you do that, it becomes easier. Because if you many people now, they come to the path and they read various books, and some of them are good, many of them aren't, but they want to acquire a skill that will allow them to manifest or actualize certain goals they have. And that's good in and of itself, but unless you understand why those goals weren't happening prior to that, it can be just like throwing, you know, gasoline on a fire. So if you read some books on New Thought, or which classical New Thought, not the newer stuff, is good, or some of the yogas, they'll tell you about training in morality and ethics. A lot of people don't want to hear morality and ethics. Well, you know, you see in the magical circles, particularly Wicca, Spell of the Week Club. You know, I want to get a new boyfriend. I want to get a new girlfriend. Well, yeah, why is it that you can't keep the one you've got? Let's work with that first. You know, the thing with easy come is easy go. And if you've ever known anyone in the financial services, the one thing you don't want to deal with is people who have either won the lottery or got an inheritance. You know, because they just don't understand how money works and they just want to spend through it all. And it's the same way with these qualities. We have to first develop our moral and ethical qualities. Who are we as a human being? And that takes time. It takes a good 4, 5, 6 years of basic fundamental meditative training and discipline, maybe 7 or 8. And then you move into some of the ritual work and the magical work or alchemical work. And that takes maybe another 15 or 20 years. So you're telling people, oh, this is going to take you good, 10, 20 years to really get everything together. They're, what? Well, what do you plan on doing in the meantime? What else are you going to do with your time? Or is this just something on the way to something else? It is a way of molding and inventing yourself. You are creating yourself from within self. It is self-creation that goes on, and self-recreation. So we have to really understand that. And, I think, at the Institute, the way we have it set up, we have a free course online. You can take that. We have other courses. You can take them as a group or you can take them individually. It's up to you. And if you want support, we have a study session twice a month, but that's optional. Now we treat you as an adult. As a college level adult. You come and take responsibility for it and move on. And I think that's what you want to look at. Are you being treated like an adult by the group, by the teacher? And what does that mean? Again, your responsibility. If they tell you, depending on the relationship, go sweep the floor, you've got to go sweep the floor, not say, I don't want to. Because maybe that's part of your getting over your self-importance. If they tell you to do something for charity, that's to help get over your greediness and your miserliness. So, the people want an intimate relationship with the teacher, but that also means a very dangerous relationship. That person now knows you. They know your weaknesses, and they're going to point them out to you to have you overcome them. And that's a relationship people say they want, but they really don't. Very often. I mean, not always, but I've seen it. So anything that seems too good to be true probably is. Anything that promises you something for nothing, run away from. And anything that tells you this is going to take you 5 or 6 or 7 years of pretty regular, steady effort and hard work, and there's no guarantees or promises, that's probably true then.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Because again, we have to do the work, right? Like having someone who's been there, who's had that experience, who's mastered whatever it is that we're interested in learning. That's incredibly helpful. They can help us. They can help us see our flaws and our weaknesses and where we need to strengthen up. But
let me say, I knew people when I was much younger. I knew people who were very, very developed, very, very potent. And one fellow, he could look at you, and it was his daughter got annoyed because he'd come over from Bombay, and people would be knocking on their door, to see him because he could pretty much tell you everything. And the story was, he goes, well, it took 40 years of practice, nothing for 40 years.
Damn.
And then boom, he says, then the apple dropped. That's what he. Then probably pomegranate. Then the pomegranate dropped.
Wow.
And I knew another person like that. Dedicated practice. Dedicated. And they could perform. They didn't do it publicly. They did it in a lodge setting. Some very interesting psychokinesis. So that's the other thing. People who are talking about their abilities generally walk away.
I deal with this, and it's related, but also unrelated in what I've been pursuing over the past few years, learning to do stand-up comedy, where, I see people who, we come up through the ranks, and they tell you it's going to take you 10 years, man. This does not happen overnight. Certainly some people are a little bit more talented than others. Some people have different gifts, etc. But, you see it, and like that idea of nothing. I mean, I've seen people just eat shit, for years and years and years, but eventually, like you said, the pomegranate drops and something happens, something clicks. It's really difficult in those times where it feels dead. It feels like nothing is improving. You're not getting any better. But I see exactly your point. And I think basically whatever we apply that to, whether it's a spiritual practice or some other skill, that's going to be part of it. And as you said too, there's no guarantees, and that makes it even more brutal, right? And you show up every day to the writing session or to the open mic or to the meditation session, and yeah, it's kind of discouraging almost. But I have seen, at least in that arena, people who seem to have almost no talent, no ability, no disposition toward that skill or ability eventually pick it up. So I mean, I don't know, maybe part of it is this mental hurdle where you have to face sort of a wall of uncertainty and fear and failure, like truly, before you get to the other side of that. And it's interesting to hear that particular story of this person who has these incredible gifts, but it still took them 10, 15, however many years to get to that point.
You know, the point is that when we do this, we have to be honest, and people generally aren't honest with themselves for a variety of reasons. And when they come face to face, which is what initiation does, genuine initiation, forces you to become face to face with the fundamental existential questions. And let me see if I remember how many there are. The fundamental notion of death, mortality, what does that mean? Okay, so you have to address that question. Many people seek to avoid it. Okay, initiation forces you to address it on some level. Then there's the question of meaning. What is the meaning in life? Life has no inherent meaning. It is the meaning that you give to it. Okay, and that's very difficult for people to grasp. What do you mean life has? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean it's meaningless. It just doesn't have an inherent meaning because there's so many different people. There's so many different activities going on. There's so many different beings and creatures, as we said earlier. So what is the meaning you bring to your life is going to be very different than the meaning, the drug dealer down the street brings to theirs. Okay? Their notion of meaning is very different from, the third world dictator. Or the, abusive councilman, the corrupt councilman. Or the minister, or the very pious nun.
But I mean,
the meaning is different. So we go from death and meaning, but now responsibility. You are responsible for your life. And aloneness. Many people have tremendous trouble being alone. So egregores, particularly political or religious or social movements, which are a combination of both, really. That's why when we look at environmentalism, we see it as a religion, and it really is. It has all the hallmarks of a religion. Okay, hence the word in ism.
Yeah.
Okay, it answers all those questions for you, and there's a salvation. There's a salvatory aspect, and you can see that in other political movements as well. We see how different activities, again, whether you accept it or not, believe it or not, it's irrelevant, but the current war in the Ukraine, at least for public consumption in Russia, is portrayed as a religious war, not just an existential one, but a religious one. Okay, and the hard part is there'll be listeners who are going to say, well, I agree with some of the things that are said there. And that's good to say I agree with some of the things. I don't necessarily mean I agree with the action taken. You see, this is where you begin to have an adult conversation about things. I can say, yeah, I do agree. I do think a lot of the comments about, there is some decadence going on. But that doesn't mean, I agree with invading a country.
Right.
And this is where, people have to become adults, become very precise in their thinking. Why precision? And we say earlier, problems aren't solved by what? Generalities. Precision.
Nuance.
So the more nuanced, the more precise and nuanced we get, the more we begin to understand what's going on within ourselves, within others, and around us, and ultimately in that spiritual dimension. We'll call the non-physical dimensions as well, because nuance is very, very critical there. Nuance is very important in that dimension.
That's awesome. Yeah, we have a question here since you kind of brought that up. I think this is just pretty relatively on topic here. My friend Kevin says, are political systems essential egregores?
Are they essentially egregores? Of course. Are they essential? Well, yes. I mean, politics is philosophy in action. It has to do with how we organize ourselves. So they are essential. The question is that organizational structure beneficial for the community, the society, the country at that time? And it can be a mix. It's often a mix. That's the issue.
Nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really an excellent answer. Really good.
Next question.
I've got one, actually. Would it be fair to say that all egregores are limiting, and because if we were to say that, would that prevent love from being an egregore then, in the like the agape sense, the unconditional type of love?
Yes. The nature of an egregore is to limit. And again, because all of nature, all creation is a limit. As I said many years ago, get ready for Saturn. Saturn's about limitation. Now, how do we deal with limits? You have to limit yourself. Concentration is another word for limit. I focus my energies on this, which means to the exclusion of everything not this. I go to the university to get a degree in electrical engineering. There's only so many English literature courses I can take and still get a degree in electrical engineering. So limitation in and of itself is the foundation of all existence. My individual self, my individual awareness is the foundation of my enlightenment. The question, though, then is, how do we overcome that? And that's where, some of the devotional aspects are important. And what is agape? What is this selfless love? How do we define love so that it's not mere sentimentality? It is right relationships. What is my proper relationship to people, places, and things, to thoughts, words, and deeds? And of course, many people conflate that with compassion and conflate that with bodhicitta in Vajrayana. But bodhicitta has several other levels of sophistication beyond that. So compassion, then we have to be careful. It's not just a weakness, but it is really the nature of the awakened heart-mind. That's why the meditations on the heart are so widespread in different classical systems.
Would that be type of a devotional meditation on the heart? Would it be like an example of a devotional?
Mostly they are, but not exclusively. But mostly. There's a rhythm, a relationship between the heart and the brain. And that's why once you do it after a while, you get certain brain sensations as the brain waves kind of harmonize. There's a fellow up at McGill University in Montreal who did some research on that. I think it's in one of my books. I don't remember which one. But it's an important point. But again, we have to say the Greek notion of love, I think there are 4 words for love in Greek. We tend to have 1. So there again, our ability to be nuanced and sophisticated about love is not very good. So we tend to be very poor at it. It's too generalized, Yeah. Just because you love someone doesn't mean you let them do things that are dangerous to themselves or others. Tough love. That's where you see the notion of wrathful practices again in Vajrayana. We don't have that notion too much, but Saturn does. Planet Saturn has that. When you get a beat down, it's because you deserve it.
That's right.
It's simply cause and effect, because it's not personal. Everyone gets it. Yeah. You're not that special, really. Everyone, but it's degree of your karma, so to speak. What are the seeds you've planted? What are the fruits you're harvesting? And this goes back to the notion of responsibility in our lives. How are we responsible to ourselves and for ourselves? And how are we responsible to others? Because we're not responsible for others, unless they're our children or our spouse or someone under our direct care. We're responsible towards others.
Could you speak about Saturn a little bit? I feel like it's something that, people talk a lot about, and they're like, oh, they worship a black cube and all this stuff. And everything, I believe, is part of a balance. And from what I understand, Saturn being time, commitment, is sort of ruling over those types of things. But I do think there's a bit of, I don't know, maybe fanaticism or just over exaggeration about that particular planet energy, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, in here we're looking at classical Hermeticism and classical astrology, even non-Hermetic astrology, but they're related through the Greeks. Indian astrology is really a survival of classical Greek astrology. Okay, and what we see is the notion of what is limit, because creation is a limit. Okay, and how do we then experience those limitations? So it is the foundation of our being. And in that sense, it is Queen of Heaven, Queen of Earth in one system, the way it's described, meaning it's the birth of everything. It is the foundation of Earth, which is what gives us stability, okay, and structure, because without that stability and structure, nothing would exist for us. And at the same time, we think of the spiritual dimension as stable, because it's so vast and open, okay? So that Saturn is that beginning point, if you will, of duality. In some systems, it's kind of like a gateway. It's very complex in many ways. But it has a sense of, because of its antiquity, it is seen as cold and hard, like Earth. Earth is cold and hard. Yeah. And what that means is, it is what it is. So you make of your life what you make of it. There's no real compassion there. That is to say there isn't compassion in the universe. There clearly is. There clearly is. There's a sense of grace. We talk about the power of grace in different systems, particularly devotional systems. But grace gets you to the edge of Saturn. It doesn't get you past it. And then, of course, within the Hermetic systems, there's beyond they call it the eighth and ninth, beyond the seventh realm, the seventh sphere, which is Saturn. The eighth and ninth is what is beyond that. In Kabbalah, you have the higher spheres on the tree of life, which can be overlapping and confusing at times. So Saturn, again, has a cycle in our lives, an important cycle. And when we have a Saturn return, it occurs at roughly 30 years of age. But many people, I've noticed people begin to have the influences, they can feel them around 27, 28 before 30 happens. Okay. And then we have it again at 60. And we have it again at 90. I mean, historically speaking, this is the 60th year. 60 years ago this month was the great Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay.
Mark,
So those forces exist, and how we respond to them is based upon how much of ourselves we have brought forth and understand and realize on a conscious level. Or we become just victims of karma and fate, but it's our own doing.
Mark, what do you think about like the big three religions and their seems to be some worship of Saturn with the hexahedron and things of that nature in their worship? There seems to be a strong connection to that hexahedron and the big three, Judaism, Christianity, and Muslim Islam tradition.
Well, I wouldn't call them the big three. They are the three monotheistic religions. They are they are the three major monotheistic faiths. But certainly, Judaism isn't the biggest religion. I think influentially, the case can be
Well,
made.
that's not mean more influence than than attendance or
yeah. But within that framework, that even gets tricky because there are many sub aspects within Judaism that people aren't aware of, just as there are many different sub aspects of Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
I think the notion of monotheism, again, that singularity aspect of it, a single deity, can be problematic because we've taken a lot of the many diverse forces and archetypes and qualities and intelligences that exist, and we try to compress them under a single entity, a single being.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than trying to express or understand them in their unique expressions. It doesn't mean they won't lead us back to maybe there is a unity. I'm not going to say there isn't or isn't. There is something that allows for an interaction, but to say everything comes from a single creator being, there's a lot of different ideas about that. A lot of different ideas. And that's where I think maybe where you're pointing to towards Saturn. One of the more interesting aspects of Saturn that we see is in the Black Madonna. Again, the Black Madonna and that symbolism is very important in alchemy. As far as the cube goes, I don't know much about the black cube at Mecca. I haven't paid too much attention to that in decades. But within the formation of the cube of space that we see in the Sefer Yetzirah, that's a very powerful meditative practice and device.
Well, there's a hexahedron on top of Saturn. When you look at Saturn, it literally is the cube, the hexahedron representation. It's on the North Pole.
I couldn't comment on that.
Okay.
A lot of people have different ideas on sacred geometry, and I have to tell you, I don't follow most of them. I stay pretty classical.
Quick joke. What's the difference between sacred geometry and regular geometry?
I heard this one. This one's funny. What is it?
$500.
That's right. Yeah, I heard that one recently. That's great. Yeah, like I say my books are free. The autograph is $15.95 plus shipping.
That's great.
And it's a package deal.
Nice.
That's my favorite joke to get the room riled up. Being in the alternative arts.
Well, and geometry is very important. It's something that there's some good books that I think I mentioned in my book on Freemasonry about sacred geometry from a classical perspective to try and understand how these energies interact, particularly on the crystalline structure, because it's within that crystalline matrix that the energy is bound, and how we then understand that is part of the alchemical path, and it's also foundation for ritual work and talismanic magic. At least it should be. In most instances, it is. But
is that something you practice? Talismanic magic?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah. And it's important because it's a way of taking those ideas and putting them in a physical representation artistically, but that have a very specific meaning.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting a vibration upon them.
And you do it according to astrological timing. to catch the rays, if you will.
Hey, I just learned about astrological time. I mean, I didn't really know that the planets were all days of the week, and every hour is a planetary hour. So, I mean, every moment you're operating on a planetary day and a planetary hour, and that's going to bring some interesting vibratory assistance or limitations.
Well, that's correct. And it's very important to know that, because then you can plan certain activities according to the energies of the day. What's also important there is that also affects your dream life. So that if you understand what the planetary influences are of the time in which you have the dream. Now, when I say the day, I mean from the day consists of when the sun is above the horizon
Yeah.
to the next morning when it comes up again. It's not a 24-hour day, although there are some magical grimoires out there, systems that have a strange way of grouping the energies. But so
Well,
today is Tuesday. So when the sun rose on Tuesday, the energies of Mars were most potent, and the energies of Mars will dominate across the night. Although they will shift, okay, they will shift at night.
every hour too, right?
Well, yes, there's a shifting every hour, but the hour is not a 60-minute hour.
That's a planetary hour.
Good. It's a natural hour.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a planet will dominate the hour of the night as well. So the planet which dominates Tuesday night, Mars will still be strong. There'll be secondary influences for the planet that is rising at nightfall. So the 13th, that would be the 13th hour. And then this will go across the day until you get 24 hours. So when the sun rises tomorrow, it will be Wednesday, and the energies of Mercury will be the energies that dominate that day.
I've always, ever since I started studying this stuff, I find it interesting that people start their work week on Moon Day, which is that emotional state, and they should really be starting the work week on Tuesday for Mars Day. But I have a practice or a performance where there's some interesting stuff going on. But to just break it down quickly, I started noticing this. Is people have different experiences within my performance based on time and space. And for me, I wrote in my own contraption 500 times before it did something amazing to me. And actually, on that day was the resurrection day, the winter solstice. And so I started understanding the planetary days and the planetary hours. And we are talking about Saturn. So a very common thing for people to, like, we open up at midnight on Friday night, which is really Saturday. So it's a Saturn hour and the Saturn day, and people go into this thing, and whatever their charts interact with, people have these unlimiting experiences where they've been removed somewhere or another of something that's blocking them in their life. And it has nothing to do with me. It has mostly to do with them in this vibratory field. And but yeah, the Saturn energy is something that I see happen a lot, because we're operating on those terms. And how is there any, like, should people be spending more time paying attention to those planetary hours and planetary days, and be more conscious and mindful in that sense?
Oh, definitely. It's very important to do so. And, you begin to understand why certain activities are going to be more beneficial to you on certain days than others. It doesn't mean that you lock yourself into it. Sometimes you have to act. You don't always have the advantage of planning everything out perfectly. But when you do have that advantage, definitely take advantage of it. So if you know what day, here's an example. If you know what day of the week you were born on, generally speaking, that is a very beneficial day for you to do anything new, to start things.
Wow.
Which means the day before it is a weekday or an ending day. It's weak. It's not strong. So that's a day to not do new things, but to clean up or finish up old tasks rather than start something new. And certain days, of course, are better for other things. So you begin to get that sense of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We got Joseph Roop in the chat. Joe Roop from Fringe FM, Lighting the Void. I'm sure you've been on that show before, Mark. He has a couple questions.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. The Fringe. Yeah, man. He asks, he says, ask about proof of alchemical changes during planetary alignments, tinctures, etc.
Wow.
When you make a spagyric tincture, generally speaking, you are advised to make it according to planetary hours and days, although you can even go so far as to make it according to particular planetary alignments. Because those alignments may be very rare, the general tendency is to use planetary hours and days in coordination with lunar cycles. Okay. In short, a waxing or growing moon is good for the beginning of something new. A waning moon is good for its completion. So certain operations are done according to lunar cycles as well. So that's why spagyrics can take time. Generally speaking, certain alchemical operations have to be done according to certain times of the year as well. You begin in the springtime in March, and you tend to I don't want to say finish up, but you get most of your work done while the energies of the year are ascending or growing. So equinox to equinox. And then in the dark period of the year, you tend to rest or clean up or finish up rather than do new things. And certain operations require a clear sky with bright sun, no clouds. And many people tend to work with spagyrics, and they'll tell you that, it's interesting. You can see the difference in your work. You just see the difference when you do it haphazardly or when you do it according to these general patterns that are set down.
That's so cool. He also asks, how would you work with the energies of the Sephiroth versus working with the energies of the planets?
Yeah, we often conflate the two, and for practical purposes, there isn't a big difference the way people work with them, but the planetary energies are a very, we'll say, dense expression of the Sephirotic energies. You may not be able to contact a planet at any time, and it may not be desirable to. Certain combinations of planets don't work terribly well together, or may be very difficult for someone who's new to it. Okay, because you have to learn to juggle the energies, particularly Saturn. Combinations of Saturn and Mars can be very, very difficult. But you can connect with the energies of the sphere a little easier. It's a little, I want to say it's a little gentler. And I think because I'm not certain on this, I think because of the way we approach it and the experiences at that level tend to be a little more refined. I don't want to say higher. That's a tricky word. That's almost like but more refined. I think they're more refined, so they don't hit us as hard. And that's an important point. A lot of these meditative practices, you absorb the energies. It's meditation with support. You are more or less relaxing into the state and allowing the energies to fill you, rather than trying to move something around or direct it. So it tends to be more, when you're dealing with the spheres, there's a tendency towards what we would call a more mystical approach, more meditative and mystical. Whereas when you're dealing with the planets, there's usually an operation involved. You're trying to manage the energies to do something for you. That's what I've noticed. Cool. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes, sir.
You got a question or two? Seemed like you were trying to ask one a bit ago.
No, I love that Saturn got brought up because I've been recently kind of tossing around in my head the idea of transcending time and not killing time, right? So part of being impeccable with our words is how we talk about things, and like this phrase "killing time" seems to be like is in our common vernacular or our vocabulary. So maybe I don't know. It would be a good idea to maybe not kill time, not to kill Saturn, maybe try to go over his head, right? And which, kind of it touches on, Mark, you were saying the eighth and the ninth spheres after the sphere of Saturn. Like, is that would be then like where you end up then, right? That after you transcended that that
That would
reality.
that would be, yes, on an initiatic journey. That would be a connection or contact with the spheres of Chokhmah and Keter on the Tree of Life. And Binah would have kind of a dual function at that point. I think for those of you who are listening to this, you can go online and download it for free at portalucis.france.fr, portalucis.fr. Or you can go to Amazon and get a printed copy. Personally, I would just get the printed copy. It's cheap enough instead of trying to print it out and bind it anyhow. But you can get a PDF for free at portalucis.france in French or English. Of the work by Jean Dubuis, the Contact with Eternity. Experience with, Contact with Eternity. And that book, it is a little difficult to read because he was an engineer and he's writing from that kind of perspective. So it's very concise. And he talks about a method of, which is essentially talismanic natural magic. That's what it essentially is. For using the energies of the year, particularly the summer solstice, to avail yourself of the potential of having a contact with a Saturn. And the purpose of that is to open up various channels. Now, the problem here is that this is very difficult. Not difficult to do, but the experience is very difficult. It is not easy to bear, and I don't say that lightly. So it's worth reading, it's worth understanding, it's worth doing. Just make sure that you get what you ask for. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for the book recommendation.
You're welcome.
Anything else?
How do you spell that, by the way? I'm going to try to look it up, the portalucis.fr.
Just look it up. It's Porte, P-O-R-T. I think it's E-A, Lucis, Lucis.France. But if you just type it in, it'll show up on your Google search. It's a French site. Yeah, you have to click on the alchemist holding the lantern. If you do that, you'll get the English site underneath. They kind of hid it under there. And there's lots of articles you can download too. There's so many of them. And make sure you go through and read all the articles and all the course lessons on alchemy and spagyrics too. Lots of great stuff there for free.
Could you recommend a book for like planetary magic, like regarding the planetary hours and planetary days and that stuff?
Well, I go over that in Kabbalah for Health and Wellness.
Okay.
I would say go through Kabbalah for Health and Wellness first before you start trying to manage planetary hours. You need to know where the whole schema fits in. This is the problem. You have to have a philosophical view. You've got to have a vision of the cosmos, kind of a map. So you kind of know what you're doing, or at least not know what you're doing, know where you're going, know what the possible interactions are of these energies, so you can manage them to some degree. Otherwise, you're just going to go exploring psychically. I mean, well, that's your choice, but then don't be surprised when you get lost. So the information in Kabbalah for Health and Wellness will give you a very, very good map and overview for practices, and help you with things to what to do when you do get lost. Because when we're out there, we will run into tigers and lions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely going to read the book that we're discussing today for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. And I do have one more question from Joe. Well, maybe two. He's blowing up the chat, Joe. You're awesome, dude. So he says, what do you? He wants to know, Mark, what you believe about. What do you believe is the philosopher's stone? Is it physical, metaphysical, energetic, etc.?
Well, it's all of the above. And the philosopher's stone, well, we're talking about the red stone. Okay. You have the first stone, which is created as a white stone. It's called a white stone, and it's called a lunar stone. We see this in the writings of Flamel, in which he talks about the first transmutation and when it occurred, and silver was the byproduct. Then we see later the second transmutation was gold. Okay, that's the red stone. That's what we think of as the philosopher's stone. And the philosopher's stone, once confected, then has to be multiplied in its potency or intensity. So when we look at the individual, those energetic qualities, remember, everything is energy. Everything. And I don't mean that in some new agey kind of way. You've got to have the juice. Okay? So when you do extended practices, that's to get the juice going. You don't chant mantras just to chant them. You chant them to get the juice flowing, the Shakti. Okay? No Shakti, nothing happens. No Shiva, nothing. No juice, no Tantra, nothing. You've got to have the juice. So that energy, as your body acclimates to it, there's an interaction that takes place. And there's a feedback that takes place between the various aspects or levels of your physicality and your psychic energies, your psychic matrix, and your own consciousness. You have to think of it three-tiered in that way. Remember, thought, word, and deed, body, speech, and mind. Okay. This transformational process occurs, and it interacts on the primary life force of the being. Remember, the light, life, and love of the German Rosicrucians. Okay. That light force, that life force, that love force, which is a magnetic quality, okay, of enchantment, okay, really an enhancement and control, okay, transforms what it comes in contact with, in this case, the energies of the body of the person, the alchemist, and primarily their blood. So the blood then becomes the alchemical stone. The blood of the adept is his alchemical stone. This does not mean that there cannot be other types of expressions of that stone, but they are just verifications of what has already occurred internally. And the transmutation is just a verification of what occurred internally. So that's why we see the blood of the adept is so critical, particularly in Christian scripture, but elsewhere as well. So it's a transformational process within the individual.
That's awesome. All right.
And by the way, that relates to Vajrayana, because on the higher levels of Tibetan Buddhism, the bodhicitta doesn't mean compassion; it means the red and the white essences, the genetic material, the blood and sperm of the adept. They call it blood and sperm, but it's I just say it's like the white and red mercuries of the adept. But these are transformed and rarefied. There's a process of rarefication that's constantly going on, which is where you see the notion of distillation, or separate and recombine. As you separate these energies out and recombine them, they get more refined, more precise, sharper. That is, they penetrate better. There's more absorption. There's a greater enhancement of the qualities of energy.
Joe's other question was pretty good.
Yeah. Do you think it's wise to work with the elements before working with the planets?
Yes, because the elements are always a part of you. They're always within you. In fact, the best way to work with the middle pillar, and I've talked about this at length for people, and it's in Kabbalah for Health and Wellness too, is the elemental version. Because that's what you're going to deal with. Even when you engage the planets, and this is where many errors take place, you're going to be engaging with them on what we'll call an elemental aspect. And as you engage those different Sephirotic levels, on one level, yes, they're projections of your own mind. And on another level, they're semi-autonomous regions, just as this world is a semi-autonomous region. Just as Mars or the moon or whatever else is a semi-autonomous region, okay? And they have their own elemental qualities too. So you have to learn to develop those elemental qualities within your body, within your mind. And that's why Earth is so important, why you do these meditations on Earth. You do the meditations on Earth, not so much so you can say, you know, I love you, Mommy Earth, but so you can develop meditative stability of the mind. Because what is the greatest problem? Not only that your mind flies all over the place, but even when you finally get it stable, then inertia takes over, which is, of course, one of the problems of Earth or Saturn as well, inertia. How do you then keep that from happening? You work with water, and also you work with fire and air. But in your dream state, which is the most crucial part, is your lucid dreaming. Okay? Lucid dreaming is critical to your path of awakening because that is the point where you're awake within your own consciousness. And at that point, you have a potential to become, we call it enlightened or illuminated or have insight. But that's also how you have that potential for what we call afterlife survival. So the capacity to understand your own mind, to be awake within your own unconscious forces, which means they're no longer unconscious because you're awake within it. Okay. And to operate and function within that domain is to bring the subjective into the objective realm and to learn how to make the objective notions a subjective experience as well, which is what we just talked about with the Philosopher's Stone. So that adept who makes the stone is able to enter into these dimensions within themselves easily, but also because they can enter into them within themselves, they can enter into them at any point. The barriers that more or less have been broken down. Not completely, but more or less.
Excellent. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really, really appreciate it. People are now starting to ask more and more questions. Would you be willing to take one or two more?
Yeah, we'll take a few more. Why not?
All right. I'm not really sure what this question actually means, but our friend Ben in the chat asks, where does Cinnabar fall?
Cinnabar path. Yeah, Cinnabar is very popular in Chinese alchemy. There were some French alchemists who used Cinnabar. I've read a little bit about it, but I think that is particularly tricky practice. I've not met anyone who's done it or recommended it, because one of the principal proponents of that path, at least in the 20th century, late 20th century, I think he died of poisoning. Cinnabar is a form of mercury.
Wow. Interesting. Shannon asks, she has to ask, and we appreciate the question, Shannon. You're awesome. Thanks for hanging out with us. Why does knowledge or wisdom reflect control? Control energy, control matter, control emotion, control dreams. It seems like limiting potential, not expanding it, ?
If you can control it, then you can do whatever you want with it. If you can't control it, then you're a victim of whatever's happening around you.
Mm-hmm. And maybe a different word might work better for you, Shannon, like facilitate or manage or something like that instead of control, because the control does seem forceful.
Yeah, it is forceful. Deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
That's called Mars and Saturn. Saturn doesn't care. Doesn't care what your individual preference for words are. It deals with reality. Do you know how to control that hammer? If you don't, get away from me with it and go work somewhere else on a roof. I don't want to know how you facilitate the hammer or how you manage the hammer. No, I manage my children and I manage difficult people. I facilitate a conversation, but I control a hammer. And we're dealing with the forces of life itself. And if you don't learn how to direct them, which is a form of control, to channel them, to bend them, to move them, you know from your own experiences in adolescence and childhood and early adulthood, when those forces of life are unregulated, what havoc they can wreak in people's lives. So we're self-discipline is self-control. Self-awareness comes from that. So it's, explore the various subtleties of the words and the meanings, but don't leave any of them out. But there's a lot of nuance to this. It's not heavy-handed, but it's firm. It is a grip.
Copy that.
You see that in the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, Krishna is leading a chariot. He's not just letting the horses go anywhere. He has a firm grip on that chariot, on those reins, on that horses. And those are the elements. 4 horses, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, 4 elements. He's there controlling them.
That's awesome. All right, last question. Is the Philosopher's Stone synonymous with the Emerald Tablets?
No, they're not synonymous. The Emerald Tablet is a synopsis of the Hermetic philosophy, which fundamentally says, verily, verily, 3 times, that which I say to you is true, most true. Okay, that which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. But sometimes the translation is that which is above is from that which is below. From, okay, and that which is below is from that which is above, which is interesting, particularly if you read some of I think it's the Gospel of Matthew. In there's a section that's similar. It says, Jesus says, and here again we see the word Peter or Petros or stone, okay, square, the cube. The first Peter, the first disciple, which would be Aries, okay. I give to you the keys of over hell and death. That which you loosen on heaven is loosed on earth. That which you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. That which you bind is bound on earth is bound in heaven. So this notion of the interchange of energy, okay, and ideas. So the Emerald Tablet is a synopsis of this Hermetic philosophy, okay, which that's the phrase most people are familiar with. It's a little longer than that. The Philosopher's Stone is the resultant product of the successful application of that philosophy. Okay. Particularly the part that has to do with the sun and the moon and the wind carrying it in its belly. Okay. And it's very clear about the role of earth in there too, how it is perfected, it's brought to earth, it is perfected.
Excellent. I love it. Joe says, you sound like Morpheus talking to Neo right now. I do get that vibe. And I truly, 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 truly appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us. I'm super grateful to you for taking the time. And man, I couldn't thank you enough. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thanks. It was a lot of fun. Glad I was able to make it.
Me too. I really appreciate it again. I'll reach out. Maybe we can do something another time. And, want to encourage everybody here in the chat. Please go and check out Mark's work. It's vast and excellent. Thanks for coming to hang out and being here in the chat. Thank you all. Be sure to go and check out the Sonic Portal on Instagram. Got that link in the show notes as well and of course, check out the 13 Questions podcast. My friend Laura asked Bill, why is it 13 questions?
This was a podcast that is the brainchild of Darren Grimes of Grammarica. The number 13 is, from what I understand, completely incidental. So if you believe in that type of thing. So that is, sorry to disappoint, but yeah, there's no story behind it.
Oh, fair enough.
Hey, I just wanted to, say that, on the topic, spiritual currency is what you pay attention to and how you spend your time. And the return on investment is the magic you create in your life. So you have to give your focus to things that matter in your life, to create things that matter. And so get out there and stop fucking around with all that media. Create something. Don't consume.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Yeah, folks, we got some amazing shows coming up next week. We will not be live. I'm going to put out an episode with my friend Nicole BZ. She's a business coach. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but she's the anti-business coach. And then on October 18th, we'll be streaming live with the Grimerica guys. Now that Bill mentioned those guys, and we're going to do a paranormal episode. So let everybody know, tell all your friends, call in with your crazy stories. We're going to talk about ghosts and all kinds of weird shit like that, and just have some fun here before Halloween. I want to once again thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mark, so much. Everybody, please go and check his stuff out. It's amazing, and I'm really, really stoked to have had the opportunity here, and we'll be promoting this much beyond this live stream here, and just let everybody know what a great episode this was. Please share it out, review us, give us stars or whatever it is on the podcast forums, and yeah, stay in touch. Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your
Thank you.
day.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.